At least I insist on that. Hi, this is Ancient History for Monday, the 12th of April, 2021. And today I will, like everyone on TV, shout about something meaningless or meaningful, as the case may be. It's meaningful. Believe me. But only because I loom close to the camera. Where we were on Friday is we were talking about the monastic movement. Monasteries are set up so that hermits can live together. Think about that. That's like jumbo shrimp. That's like somebody saying, get on the plane. No, I'm getting in the plane. You can get on the plane. It makes no sense. How is it that people who want to go off and live with God can live together? This is a conflict. Basic concept. But the geography, the climate of Europe in the West does not allow for easy hermit living, which to an extent the deserts of the Middle East do. You can live alone in the wilderness and survive. It's not easy. You get dark by the sun. It's you can get killed any number of ways, scorpion, sunstroke, but it's possible. Not so much in the north. So Saint Benedict comes up with a rule that's going to allow for people to live alone together, or to live together with God as their primary relationship. The Benedictine rule starts by dividing time by prayer and song and religious service. And because these prayers and songs and religious services interfere with sleep, REM dreaming, this is not what they know, this is what we know, REM dreaming, which is necessary for the wakefulness of our minds, is interfered with. And so the monks live lives that are susceptible to intuition, to making intuitive rather than rational connections between things. And the intuition of the monks, well, it feels spiritual. And it may, in fact, open the mind to subtle hints that God may be giving you about life. You know that there's a truth to that. If you're at a turning point in your life and you want to try to figure out what to do, your brain, your mind, your logic, your reason is only going to take you so far. You can't necessarily reason your way out of a problem. Sometimes you got to feel your way through, intuitively, using your senses, not your sight, your touch, but your sense of how things work in the world. This is why people have astrology or magic as crutches to use to try to figure out what they should do next. The truth is they're going to need to make a choice, and that choice is going to affect their futures, the futures of others, in unpredictable ways. Because one of the secrets of life is no one ever has enough information. In fact, the whole concept of needing enough information before you make an important choice is silly. Today, thanks to that magic box connected to other magic boxes through the ether, you have a library greater than that of Alexandria at your fingertips. You have the greatest library in human history. And aside from the half of it that's devoted to pornography, there's a lot of good information in the other parts. How many people, when they're making important decisions, take a day or two or three or a week to research? You know, there's an old story about a man who had an enemy. There were two kings. They were enemies with one another. And one of them finds the wisest man in all of his realm, the most educated and wisest fellow, most agile mind, and he makes a gift of that person to the other king. That doesn't make any sense. Why would a king give up his most wise and well-educated advisor? The next time the enemy king had a problem, the advisor told him, well, this could happen, or that could happen, or the other thing could happen. All these things might happen. And the other king got so paralyzed with the possibilities of things that he began to make stupid decisions. Sometimes it's not about having too little information in those important moments in your life. It's about having too much information. The truth is, most people, most of the time, are not rationalists. Most people, most of the time, when it's important stuff, they go with their gut. They go with their instincts. They go with what feels right. Reason can only take you so far. This is why we have said to ourselves through generations of science fiction that artificial intelligence will ultimately be at a disadvantage when competing with us, because artificial intelligence can't intuit. It can't make a leap of faith. It can't make a leap beyond logic. Actually, that's not necessarily true. But what we assumed would be artificial intelligence was assumed to be this hyper-rational, hyper-logical thing. Whereas a lot of the stuff that goes into AI research is about getting the computer minds, and they usually link a few different minds together, to try to intuit, to try to come up with what's called fuzzy logic answers. Answers that aren't necessarily clear and crisp, but answers that sort of deal with the approximations and the ambiguities in life. You're naturally designed for that. So am I. Okay. Given all of this, monks in monasteries work very, very hard. They actually produce more goods than the average farm. They make better products like nut bread and other things than the average farm. Monks are herbalists and healers, pharmacologists and surgeons, people who you go to when you're feeling pain or when your loved ones are in genuine discomfort. The monks help people, heal people. To the extent common people, everyday people are educated, or local people might go and get an education and maybe even learn to read or write or count. That's done by the monks. So a monastery is actually a wonderful thing to have in your region, even if they don't pay taxes, even if they're not part of the system, even if they have this building that's probably a nice fortification that you can't use, because they provide goods and services that nobody else can. But the other thing that monasteries provide is a safety valve. A steam engine is basically a big pot of water sealed over on the top. Now, liquid water is fairly dense. That's why it's liquid. When you convert a cubic inch of liquid water to steam, that actually fills 10 or 15 cubic inches of air. The volume is radically different. Now, in a normal pot where you're boiling water, that's not a problem because the top is open. That vapor is going out and filling the room with moisture. But if you've got the top closed, well, it'll probably pop up and down because the pressure inside will pop it up and it'll release and go down. Then the pressure will build and go up and release and it'll go down. What if you have a pressure cooker or a steam engine? What you're doing is you're bolting the top on and you're connecting a valve or two to it. Now, the bolting on converts it into basically a steel ball. And sooner or later, that steel ball is going to explode with deadly force. Because water vapor is simply not going to be denied. You convert enough liquid water to vapor, and you will rupture almost any physical object. Solid steel can't withstand it. So a lot of these things have what's called a safety valve. What it is an opening on the side that's pretty tightly closed. It's designed only to open if a certain amount of pressure inside builds up. And then it opens. And when it opens, steam is released. And when the pressure goes down again, it closes. And when the pressure goes up again, steam is released. In society, especially a society like feudalism, a society where everyone is born into their place, a society where you are what your daddy does, you need freedom. You need freedom somewhere. You need an answer to a life that you can't live anymore, to living a lie that you can't stand anymore. You need a way out. And monasteries and nunneries provide that way out. If your life isn't working, especially if you've got money, even if you don't, you can go to a monastery, or if you're a woman, a nunnery, a convent, and you can ask to join. At the very least, they'll probably take you in, feed you, clean you up, clothe you, which is something for people in the Middle Ages, especially the Dark Ages, because people are not necessarily safe or well-fed or clean. But in addition to that, the abbot, who is the leader of the monastery, will actually take seriously your appeal, and you'll be put on a probation, and they'll train you. And if you're able to live within the strictures of the monastery, and they are very, very strict, you don't have any freedom within the monastery. So how is it that I could say that the monasteries are a safety valve? Because living a monastic life is a very particular kind of life. If your world outside the monastery has fallen to pieces, and you can find a new reason to live behind the monastic walls, yeah, you don't control how you spend your days, but you're no longer in that hellish situation you used to be in. As such, you're free of it. Everyone from kings and queens, emperors even, to the lowest of the low. Everyone from all those groups had access to the monastery or the nunnery. It was a place to go in a world without many places to go. It was an alternative to the life you were born into, in a world that usually forced you to be what you were born to be, with no choice. So monasteries provide a social safety valve, like on a pressure cooker or a steam engine, for the people who just don't fit in. Instead of killing themselves or living in misery, they might find meaning in a life. However, it's not an easy life. There are 3 vows that are at the heart of the Benedictine order. The first is the vow of poverty. The vow of poverty isn't just what it seems. What it sounds like is, I won't amass too much property in my life. It goes beyond that. The vow of poverty isn't just, I'm not going to be rich. I'm going to give up my riches. Consider the lilies of the field. They neither sow nor they reap. Consider the bees. Jesus, through his parables, talked about flowers and other life forms that don't seem to work. They exist on their own terms. Human beings work. Now, you may not see that. You may not see work as the big part of your life. When I was your age, I certainly didn't. The big part of my life was my friends and what we did together for fun. It wasn't work. I did work when I needed to, but not much when I didn't. Although for me, part of fun was learning history, so it ended up paying off. As you get older, you probably will find your work becomes much more important to you. Right now, if you get a job, you're probably going to be working a hard job for very low wages. That's teenage work. That's normal. You got to start somewhere. You got to have to learn to be an employee, to show up at work on time, to put up with some of the boss's nonsense, to go to work when you'd really rather do fun things, to work hard, not just enough, to go above and beyond, to justify your paycheck. And while some of you are already capable of these things, many of you are not. That's why you earn low wages. As time goes on, that'll change. As you demonstrate your capacity for good work, as you demonstrate a work ethic. It's important to me that I'm a teacher. Very important to me. And I suspect that if you look at the lives of the adults in your world, many of them have jobs that are very important to them too. My mom never wanted to become a police detective, but she was. She was a good one. She saved lives. And as difficult as the job was, and being a police officer is one of the hardest jobs in the world, bar none. Every day you go to work and you see people out of control. Every day you go to work and you see the worst in human beings. And still you got to be able to come home and be nice for your family. It's not easy. Some people are nurses, some are doctors, some are lawyers, some do a normal job, but they do it with dignity. The older you get, chances are the more important your work's going to be to your own sense of self. Believe it or not, it'll probably happen. And those of you for whom work doesn't become that, your family will. If you have children of your own, especially, your family will. Giving up wealth isn't just taking your riches and putting it in a charity box. It's giving up that whole identity as a producer and as a worker, as an individual who's succeeding, all that. When you give up wealth, when you take a vow of poverty, you're taking a vow to stop being vain in the way you live your life. You're taking a vow to stop pursuing personal glory. You do what you're told. The people who tell you what to do are worshipful. They want you to have a good experience with God, and they want you to be a productive person. You've got to trust them. God, you know how hard it is to trust people? Think about that. Look at your life. Don't talk about this, but think. Who in your world do you really trust? I hope you've got a few people. People who you trust with your biggest secrets. People who you trust if you were in trouble. People who you would trust if you were in danger. People who could help you figure out those Gordian knots in life. The problems that have no good solution. People who you can be vulnerable around. That's rare. That's a rare thing. It's a precious gift. And the older you get, the harder it is to have it. Because the older you get, the more you've been burned by people who you give your trust to and turn out not to be trustworthy. Or something happens that changes things. My wife, from 5th grade until her senior year in college, was inseparable with the girl that she grew up with. They were so close that when my wife was a freshman in college, out of nowhere, she got sick to her stomach and threw up. Well, her best friend was sick with the flu back home, and it was actually at the same time. She vomited in a sympathetic way. That's how close they were. My wife went away to college, her friend stayed behind, but they remained friends. And then something changed, and my wife's friend turned on her. It wasn't just, okay, we're moving on, let's not be friends anymore. It was knife in the back, betrayal, gotcha time. Now, the horrible thing of that isn't just that a person that you trusted betrayed you. You have to wonder, was there ever a friendship there in the first place? Or was it always just a lie? A joke? See, I believe that my wife's friend was her friend, for real. Until something happened. Maybe she got jealous. My wife was going away to college. She stayed home. It was because her father wanted her to stay home. They had a brother. She had a brother who was developmentally disabled, and her father wanted her to take care of her brother. When she got married, my wife's former friend lived across the street from mom and dad with her new husband. And she spent every part of every day, or she spent a part of every day taking care of her brother. I don't know what happened. I know that it happens. It's happened to me. People who who I did trust. People who had every reason to trust me, just knife in the back. It's unpleasant in every way. And the more it happens, the more you're tempted never to trust anyone. In a monastery, you can trust God, like anywhere else if you're a believer. But in a monastery, you can also trust that the system is not out to harm you. The system is not out to take advantage of you. You work hard. It's honest work. You pray hard, not play hard. Pray hard. That's honest work. You serve God with your talents. You develop new talents. It's clean. It's simple. It's healing. Sometimes people go into the monastery and leave a few years later a better person for it, a changed person. But you have to give up wealth, and you have to give up the idea that you are a glorious being deserving of a wonderful future. You live in service. You live simply. You eat very simple foods, not tasty stuff. You have a very simple bed, or maybe you sleep on the floor. You don't have much privacy, and you don't have much free time. The second vow is the vow of chastity. Now, automatically, what everyone thinks of, including me, when somebody says vow of chastity is no sex. Well, that's a shame. Sex between married people, with all the maturity that comes along with that, is a good thing. Otherwise, people wouldn't want to do it. And the reason I make those qualifications is I've known too many children who've had children. It's tough. I knew that when I was a student, I was 14. There was a girl I knew in school, 14-year-old mom. It's not easy. And it's not easy on the kid. Because 14-year-old dad didn't become a part of life. And it was probably for the best. I'll tell you, when there's sex, there's a possibility of pregnancy. I don't care what measures you use. If you're not ready to have a child with someone, maybe, maybe find another way to express your love. Because having a child is one of the biggest things that'll ever change your life. And most people, in fact, nobody is ready for it the first time. But if you're in your late 20s or mid 20s or early 20s and you've got a job and you've got some establishment, you've got a way to make a living for the kid, there's hope. There's hope that the kid will grow up well. The less of that wherewithal that you can bring to it, the less hope that kid is going to have. of growing up without getting involved with the wrong people, growing up wrong, growing up bad. Or of making a mistake, although you never can tell. People, good kids make mistakes. My brother-in-law, or not my brother-in-law, my half-brother, what do you call it? Foster brother, that's it. My wife, my mother married a husband. He had a child. There's a word for the brothers and sisters I got through that child. What is it? Stepbrother. Stepbrother! Thank you! It's so simple, and I couldn't get it! Stepbrother! I didn't get a chance to know my stepbrother. Because within a few months of the marriage, he ended up accidentally taking an overdose of his grandfather's medication. He and some buddies were doing some pills, and one of them still in a hospital. My stepbrother's dead. The other two recovered. One because she was taken immediately to the hospital by her family. The other because he fell down in a golf course in the middle of winter and his metabolism slowed down. He had frostbite and hyperthermia, but he had also, because his metabolism had slowed down, the drug has not had a chance to poison his system. So he lived. Was my stepbrother a bad guy? No. He was a nice kid. He was a good kid from everything I've learned. He had flaws like everyone else. Chastity is not just about not having sex. The vow of chastity is about not having family. In the Middle Ages, your identity is your family. You are what your daddy does. If your daddy's a farmer, you're a farmer. If your daddy's a warrior, you're a warrior. If your daddy's a carpenter, you're probably going to grow up to be a carpenter. If you're female, it's the status of your father, then the status of your husband, or the status of your brother, then the status of your son if you live long enough. You don't choose your life in the Middle Ages. Your life is chosen for you when you're born. The only exception to this are towns and cities. Everyone else is born into their role. The family is everything. And let's say you're fortunate enough to be wealthy. Let's say you're fortunate enough to to be born into a noble aristocratic family. The family is everything. The family's going to tell you what you're going to do, who you're going to marry. Common people could at least marry for love. Noblemen can't. Noblemen marry for property. They marry for marriage alliances. They marry for political reasons. Their job as a married couple is to have children, legitimate children, which is why among the aristocracy in Europe, taking lovers was so common. But you have to take precautions so that you don't have too many bastard children if you're a guy. And if you're a woman, you definitely have to take precautions. Because if you have another man's child when you're married to a nobleman, it's bad all around. You and that child will suffer. A vow of chastity means that you're no longer a member of your noble family. You're God's. Yeah, you love your brothers and your sisters and your mom and your dad and your nephews and your nieces. But you're no longer a part of all that. You're no longer there to serve your family's interests. You're an individual who has chosen to become part of God's family. You're a monk. So a vow of chastity isn't just about not having sex anymore. It's about not having children. It's about not having a wife or a husband if you're a nun. It's about not being involved in the family politics. HBO had a show a few years ago called Game of Thrones, and in that show, I will call on you in a moment, there was a group called the Night Watch. Anyone could join, and it was like joining the monastery, except the Night Watch, so they were just a watch. They would spend their lives on a big wall of ice, guarding the realms of men from horrible things to the north. And all of the family politics in that story of Game of Thrones was based on real politics in Europe. They just added magic and graphic sex, because it's HBO. So there are people in the night watch, in what do I call them in the night watch? In the watch, who are members of royal houses and noble families involved in wars with one another. But they work together side by side every day. Why? Because they've taken a vow of chastity. And that means to them, and they explain this, that means you don't get involved in family politics. So a vow of poverty is not just giving up wealth, it's giving up the vanity of glory of being a famous, successful person that everyone admires. The vow of chastity, you're not just giving up sex, you're giving up your family identity, your identity as a member of your family.
Do these vows still apply if you've left the monastery?
Yeah. If you become a monk, now you can leave. At that point, your vows are no longer valid, and you're no longer a monk. You've got to go out in the world and make a living again. But yeah, that's still the way it is for monks in monasteries. Some monasteries are very, very strict about these things. Others less so. Did you have your hand up?
No.
Okay. The third is the vow of obedience. We Americans are very, very reluctant to let anyone have power over us. It's very common to have a reaction when somebody gives you an order. You're not the boss of me, even if they are. You're not the boss of me, you say inside. How dare you give me an order? How dare you? Sorry, it's a little Greta Thunberg flowing through. How dare you? How dare you give me an order? Me, a free person. Wow. Yeah, we're free. But we also are part of a family. And if you're living under your parents' roof, you live by their rules or you get out. And if you are in school, you've got to put up with people like me and our nonsense rules. Well, we don't think they're nonsense, but I can see where you might. You don't like it? Leave. Go somewhere else. Not all schools are run as strictly as this. Not all schools will teach you as much as we have to teach. When you get a job, to keep your job, the boss may say something totally unfair to you, and you're not going to go back and argue with them. In most cases, if you do that, you're fired. I'm not saying that to hold a job, you've got to constantly accept abuse. But I'd be lying if I said that there weren't jobs I had where that was a part of it. And I found another job right quick because I didn't want to work that way anymore. It'll happen to you, I suspect. It should. It's part of growing up. You have a lousy boss. Maybe you get fired. That also is part of growing up. Sometimes you can do nothing wrong and still fail. That's part of growing up. It's part of life. It's unfortunate. You can do everything right and still fail. It's not fair, but it's the way it is. Part of faith, and it's not something that I'm very good at, I'm not pretending that it is. Part of faith is accepting that you can't control everything and that you don't necessarily know what's best. I've had students who've killed themselves and students who died in accidents while they're still in high school. I've seen what happens to students who go through near-death experiences and come out the other side. Usually they're much wiser because suffering can lead to wisdom. Sometimes not. I've known kids who died within 3 months, 6 months of graduating in car accidents. Yet I'm still a Christian. I've studied the Holocaust, the final solution, all the nasty things people have done to one another over the last few thousand years, and yet I'm still a Christian. I'm not a good Christian, but I still believe. How is it that I can still believe with all the horrible things? On some level, I have to accept, and it's not easy, that the way God set up the world isn't wrong. I have to accept that bad things happen to good people, that good things happen to bad people, that the good die young, sometimes too young. I have to accept that something like genocide is happening right now in China under the Communist Party. I have to find a way to still believe. One of the things that a monk has to do when he swears obedience, it's not just about, okay, I've got to go rake the leaves. I've got to go clean up the cow stalls. I'm doing what I'm told. It's not just that. Genuine obedience is trusting. It's trusting. You're trusting that the person who is the boss of you is not going to abuse you, is not going to misuse you, is not going to waste you. You're trusting that he or she knows what they're doing. So, what a monastery is, it's a place where the price of admission is you've got to give up your anger to God to an extent, your resentment of the way God's world works, your outrage over the stuff that's allowed to happen. And on some level, you got to trust that God knows what he's doing, and that whatever injustices happen in this world will be corrected in the next. That's not an easy thing to accept. But that's obedience. You've got to give up your identity as a member of your family at a time when your family is everything. You've got to leave your family to its own devices. You've got to do what your monk abbot tells you, not what the paterfamilias tells you. And you've got to give up sex. That's not an easy thing to do. And you've got to give up glory, as well as luxury, comfort, money, the security that money brings. Money may not be able to buy you happiness, but money can buy a hell of a lot of peace of mind. Your life may be a total wreck if you're wealthy, but at least you're not on the street, which some people are. But you got to give up all that. And all of that, poverty, chastity, and obedience, is really giving up yourself, giving up your life, and turning your life into an act of service to God. You're under the authority of your abbot, who's the leader of the monastery. He's under the authority of the Pope, and he's under the authority of God. Or if you're a nun, you're under the authority of your abbess, who's under the authority of the Pope, who's under the authority of God, and you submit. You lead a life of service, not of selfishness. It's a powerful thing. And next time we're going to talk about what monasteries and monks do before we shift over to the Islamic world. Any questions, comments, or thoughts about any of this? Okay, thank you for your attention. And you at home, remember to do quiz 10.